This is my 5th CS2 presentation, and I always get up here and talk about some hyper-technical penetration testing type engagements that we've been on within the defense industrial base, and in fact across all industries really. And in case you don't know what pen testing is, that's when a company hires an organization, a team like mine, to actively break into their environment the same way a hacker might, to do it before real threat actors break in and show them where their weaknesses are, and then we can help remediate those issues. So we do this for organizations across all industries, but including within the defense industrial base, and that's what we're going to focus on here today, obviously. Real quick, I work for a company called PKFOD, PKF O'Connor Davies. We are a authorized C3PAO. I am a lead CMMC certified assessor, as well as leading PKFOD's ethical hacking team, our penetration testing team. So I live my life with one foot in information assurance and compliance, and the other foot in hyper-technical information security, and it kills me a little more every day. So, you know, at the heart of what we do, we build up and we help develop and implement and build information security programs, including against CMMC and NIST 800-171. But on the flip side, we are also kind of actively burning those programs down as ethical hackers. And Ms. Williams from Coal-Fire Federal, I don't think you're in the audience, but she probably doesn't like that I say, from my perspective, based on the testing that we've done, compliance doesn't always equal security. I've made a career on hacking into compliant environments where you might be able to demonstrate that your world is compliant with NIST 800-171, CMMC, or maybe another framework, but we still break in and we still get through. We know what technical cybersecurity really looks like and what resistance to real world threats really look like. So the flip side, though, might be true. Security sure can equal compliance if you're approaching these sort of engagements or these projects within your company as from a security-focused point of view, rather than a compliance-focused point of view. Then you'll be addressing real-world threats. And real-world threats is what we're here to talk about today. So we're going to start with a little introduction. We'll call it a rant. And then we're going to go through 5 of the most common configuration-based weaknesses that my team abuses on red team penetration testing engagements within the defense industrial base. So we're going to start by talking about weak image deployment services. It's going to be very technical talk. We're going to talk about computer accounts and why we like them so much and how easy they are to get. We're going to talk about a very specific Windows service that is most probably definitely running in your environment that you might not know about, that is very valuable to an attacker. We're going to talk about one very, very important well, really there's 2, but configuration setting in Active Directory that is not turned on by default, but absolutely must be turned on in your environment, and I will prove to you why. And lastly, we're going to talk about probably the most technical part of the talk, a specific feature of the Kerberos protocol, which can be abused by attackers. And it's so abusable and so well known that Microsoft acknowledged that and gave us the tools to fix that problem or to mitigate that risk, and nobody uses the tools that Microsoft has given us, at least not in my experience as a pen tester. So then we'll talk about next steps in general, including the immediate next steps of sort of how to fix those things if you find yourself to be vulnerable to them, and hopefully we'll still have time for questions. So the rant. At PKFOD, we build and implement information security programs for organizations within the DIB. We assess information security programs that we didn't develop, and we hack companies across all industries, including the DIB. And because we live on both sides of the table, we do the compliance work, we do the security work, we build programs, we burn those programs down. We have a perspective on CMMC and indeed other compliance frameworks that force us to approach these types of projects with a security-first mindset, because we know what it takes to secure an environment. We know what it takes to break into an environment. So we even approach our compliance projects with a security-focused, sort of a security focus, I should say. And to sum it up, I think I'll say that I do think that your commitment to a SPRS score of 110 is absolutely admirable, but we still owned you. And your documentation, your system security plan, your policies, your procedures, they are top notch. They look great. They might even be implemented. But you didn't address the threat. And you met all the requirements. You might have even now have an actual CMMC certification, but you are still part of the problem because DFARS tells us that we need to implement adequate security for controlled unclassified information, and they gave us a compliance framework to do it with. But I will show you, I hope, by the end of the presentation, that the framework that we've been given really does, depending on how you implement it, provide genuine security value, because each and every one of the things that I'm here to talk about today, and honestly, every single technique and tactic and attacker procedure that I've talked about here at CS2 over the past 5 presentations maps directly to the CMMC framework. The requirements in CMMC do address these problems if you approach these requirements with a security-first mindset. So at my last presentation, I said something that I think resonated with the community, and that was that hackers don't care about your SPRS score. And so today we'll update that and say that hackers don't care about your CMMC certification. So what we're going to do is we're going to conduct a penetration test here today. We're going to hack into an example defense industrial-based contractor. If you're feeling bold, we can pretend that it's your company, maybe. Maybe let's pretend we're hacking into your company. And I'm going to demonstrate 5 attack techniques. At the very beginning of this, we're going to start with just a network connection, just an internal network connection. So this is an assume breach scenario. Assume that there's a bad guy on your network already. And then we're going to end, after going through those 5 things, with administrative privileges over all the things in your network. And then we're going to call that an attack chain. This is when you take multiple, maybe even moderate, lower risk items, and you put them together. So we're going to use the output from the first thing, and we're going to use it as input to the second thing, and so on and so forth. And we're going to be moving laterally and elevating our privileges. And by the end, we'll have administrator access over all the things. And this really is an attack chain that we exploit all the time, very, very frequently, these 5 things in this order, in fact. I'll also tell you how to fix these items, but also critically, we'll demonstrate that where these implementations fit into your actual ongoing CMMC compliance effort. Will show that by doing these things, and by fixing these issues, if they exist in your environment, you'll be moving forward on your compliance journey. At the same time, you're implementing an information security program that addresses real-world threats. So we're going to dive right in. It's going to get technical. That's why it's the technical track. If you remember, we only have a network connection now. That's where we're starting. I have a device in your network. Maybe I've compromised an endpoint. Maybe I plugged something in. Doesn't matter how it got there for the purposes of this conversation, but I am on your network. So we don't know where anything is on your network. We don't have any credentials. We don't have any passwords. Just an IP address. We're inside. So one of the first things that we're going to do is try to obtain a set of credentials, because that'll allow us to do a lot more. So this is one way that we can do that, is by abusing your automated image deployment system. So a lot of organizations, especially bigger organizations, support the automated deployment of new images to new workstations, new laptops, things like that. Kind of a hands-free approach to installing your gold image on a new system. And this relies on network boot. So what happens is you have an empty machine, right? No operating system installed, and you turn it on, plug it in to the network, and it's going to reach out over the network and ask everybody on the network, anybody it can reach. It's going to say, does anybody out there have an image for me? And your imaging server will reply, sure, yes, I have an image, here you go. And it's going to do this whole process on the back end to obtain an initial installation image, a set of configuration files, and then ultimately you'll be able to install your actual operating system image. There's a problem with this process. The problem is that it relies on the TFTP, which is the trivial file transfer protocol. The T stands for trivial, and that means no authentication required, no encryption over the network, and that makes it abusable. by bad guys, like me. So there's two attack scenarios here. We can, the easiest one by far, is to just spin up an empty virtual machine on your network and just let it boot from the network and see if we magically get some details about your gold standard image served to us for free with no credentials, no passwords, no encryption, none of those things. And if I'm not on the same network as your imaging server, if I'm on a different subnet or a different VLAN, we can scan your network. Or again, this doesn't require credentials. We can scan your network for port 69, open. That is TFTP. And we can just go download your image directly. So here's two different ways of us getting to the initial sort of installation image associated with your kind of deployment services. And why do we want to do this? We want to do this because in lots of cases, almost all of them, your installation image is going to have a set of configuration files on it that includes domain credentials to do a couple things. It will probably be used to authenticate to a network share to pull down the actual Windows operating system image. And it might also be used to join the system to the domain, among other things, to pull down GPO and things like that. So that's what we're after. We have established an initial foothold in this example environment by doing nothing more than spinning up an empty virtual machine and waiting to download the installation image from your deployment server without any credentials, without even knowing where that server is, right? We get these files, we go through that image, and we find these configuration files, and now I have a set of valid credentials on your network. So that's step one. Before we talk about the next thing that we do after we get a set of credentials, because now we have a foothold, now we can do a lot more on your network now that we have a set of credentials. And I'll say that in more than one case, the credentials that are stored on that image have been, in real-world penetration tests, administrator account, a domain admin. And let's assume, for the purposes of this conversation, that that's not the case, because that would make this a very short presentation. This is a normal, regular old user account. It's used to authenticate to a network share, grab an image, grab the actual Windows image. But in any case, this is a valid user account, minimum privileges, right? It doesn't have anything special. That's what we're starting with here. Before we talk about the next step in this attack chain, let's talk about one, how to fix this, and two, where fixing this fits explicitly into the CMMC requirements. The CMMC is telling us that we should have been denying network communications by default. Most folks are implementing this maybe exclusively at the perimeter of their network. But here's a really great example of a place where you should consider implementing 3.13.6 is denying network communications with your deployment servers by default. Because everybody should not be able to pull down those plain text credentials. That's the other thing. Those are plain text credentials. TFTP does not provide encryption. It is not required. There is no authentication required. So are you meeting 3.5.10 if this is how your imaging process works? No, you're not. That might be a POAM. Depends on your kind of process. But in general, the way this works is that those credentials are coming over the network in the clear, and they are being stored on that image in the clear. So this is an opportunity to revisit your implementation of 3.5.10 to, one, strengthen your compliance program, but way more important than that, eliminate an actual serious real-world risk from an information security perspective. Now, number two, we have a low privileged user account, regular old user account, no special privileges. The next thing we're going to do is abuse a default configuration in Active Directory, which allows any user or computer account to create additional computer accounts. So there's two types of account objects, security principles in Active Directory. In fact, there's more than that, but for the purposes of this discussion, we have user accounts and we have computer accounts. Both of them are security principles. That means they have passwords. They can authenticate. Computers have passwords too, computer accounts. These are just objects in Active Directory. And user accounts, that's what we have access to right now, a user account. Organizations spend a lot of time, maybe money, a lot of effort in monitoring user accounts. I don't want to use a user account. I would rather use a computer account because nobody monitors computer accounts. So I'm going to go ahead and abuse a default setting in Active Directory that maybe you haven't changed yet, which is called the machine account quota. By default, this domain level property in Active Directory, called the machine account quota, allows any authenticated object, meaning any computer account, any user account, to create up to 10 more computers in Active Directory. So that's the default setting. The MAQ, machine account quota, is set to 10. That property corresponds to a specific permission, a user right assignment, called add workstations to domain. So when I say create computer accounts, you can think of it as joining a system to the domain. It's the same action. By default, that user rights assignment is provided to the authenticated users group. Authenticated users includes everybody. Every user account, every computer account. So that's these two default settings put together means that any user and even any computer in your network has, by default, permissions to create up to 10 more computer accounts. So let's just go ahead and create one. We're going to create a backdoor computer account right here. I used the output from step 1 here is a user account. We compromised the user account. So we've used that exact user account that we obtained in step 1 to create a backdoor computer account. And it's going to be called cs2-computer. So this is the account, a computer account, but still, it's the Active Directory account that we're going to use for the remainder of this attack. Because nobody is monitoring computer accounts, and computer accounts can do things that user accounts can't. And we're going to get to that a very important point later in this presentation. So this is a problem as well, I think. By default, anybody can create new accounts in Active Directory. They can't create user accounts, but they are allowed to create computer accounts. We're supposed to limit information system access to the types of functions and transactions that authorized users are permitted to execute. Should users be able to create new accounts at all? We don't let them create user accounts, but we do let them create computer accounts, by default, I should say. And from an attacker's perspective, there is no difference. In fact, I prefer to have access to computer accounts for a number of reasons. So you can further your implementation of this requirement and close a really serious information security gap if you just manage computer account creation kind of the same way you manage user account creation, which is limiting that functionality to administrative users only, which fits nicely with separating user functionality from system management functionality, because I think it's clear that if I asked anybody here if creation of user accounts was system management functionality, you'd probably say yes. So why is creation of computer accounts not considered system management functionality? It really should be, and it should be restricted to admins, because computer accounts are a great way to fly under the radar, and also like I said, they have certain permissions in Active Directory that user accounts don't, and we are going to take advantage of that a couple steps from now. So what have we done so far? This takes about 5 minutes on a penetration testing engagement. So we started with nothing. We grabbed a user account by booting up an empty VM, super easy. And then we used that user account to create our backdoor computer account that nobody is monitoring. So that's where we're at right now. The next step is we're going to go hunting on your network using that computer account. Again, from this point forward, we never touch that user account again. We're going to do everything with our computer account. We're going to hunt across your entire network for a specific service that's running on any host. We don't care where it's running at this point. And the truth of the matter is any security principal, that means any user or any computer, anything with a password, can list the services that are running on other systems in your network. And some of those services are much more valuable than others. The attacker wants to find the web client service. That's a service that may or may not be running in your environment. We find it in most environments, especially on endpoints, sometimes on servers. The web client service supports the WebDAV protocol, WebDAV, And that allows you to download and upload files from traditional network shares over web protocols, over HTTP. Traditionally, that would be over SMB, like port 445 type traffic. If you're running the web client service, you can download those files over HTTP. So that's what that service does. It supports a very specific protocol, and it's a very, very valuable service for us as attackers, and I will show you why. First, we have to identify where it's running, and there's tools for that. There's tools for all these things, obviously. And we run a quick scan across the entire subnet that we're on. Maybe we run it across your server subnet, and we find it running. Web client is running on one of your servers. This is a really valuable server. Right now, we don't actually have access to any systems, right? We only have access to accounts, we'll say, in Active Directory. But we just found that web client, that specific service that we care about, is running on a member server. And why is this service the one that we care about? Because it introduces an entire class of vulnerabilities. We'll call them weaknesses, called authentication coercion. So authentication coercion is a type of issue that allows an attacker to force another system on the network to authenticate to somewhere else. I can force member server, because of the web client service running, I can force that server that's running that service to authenticate back to me. I can make that happen, and that's called authentication coercion. Microsoft, I'll show you how this works in a second, but Microsoft acknowledges that this exists. This is a feature of various remote procedure calls that are built into the Windows operating system. And Microsoft will only fix these issues if they don't require authentication. So when these types of problems, when authentication coercion vulnerabilities do exist, and they can be exploited without authentication, without me providing a password to do it, Microsoft will patch those problems. But they will never fix authenticated authentication coercion, meaning I have to use a password to do it. Right now I'm using my computer account. I just created this computer account. It has no permissions on the network, but it can force arbitrary servers on your network to authenticate to wherever I want it to authenticate to. And generally, we're going to make it authenticate back to us. So this is not a problem that goes away with a patch. This is built into the operating system, and it's something we abuse on every single penetration test in various capacities. So this is what it looks like. Again, it's just more tools. We run a tool that will force that system, using my computer account, to authenticate back to the system that I'm actually operating on. And what happens then is that computer spits out some authentication information. And you'll see that this is a computer account of the member server. The server that's running web client just authenticated back to me and gave me a cryptographically protected version of its computer account password. So what's happening here is we've leveraged these weak remote procedure calls to make that system authenticate back to us, and it spit out a hash, a password hash. And I don't know if you notice anything really bad about the password hash that it spit out, but that's an NTLM version 1 hash, which is really, really bad. There's nothing you can do to secure the NTLM version 1 protocol, and we're going to pretend we didn't see that, because that is an immediate win for a penetration tester. The presence of NTLM v1 in any environment, in any capacity, is an immediate path to full network compromise. And that's outside of the scope of this specific talk. If you want to learn more, I'm happy to talk about it. But let's pretend that this is a normal version 2 hash for the purposes of this talk. But if v1 is running in your network, be known that, or let it be known rather, that this would have been a really short talk. So now we have a computer account password hash. There's two things that attackers can do in general when we obtain a password hash. The first is try to crack that hash, right? We can try to, for lack of a better term, reverse that hash into the actual plain text password. And we do that for user accounts. But computer account passwords, remember this is an actual computer account's password. Those are managed by the computer, with Active Directory, and they are something like 120 characters long. So there's no way that we will crack this password. We are never going to be able to recover in a reasonable amount of time the actual plain text password for that computer account just because of its length and complexity. So we don't even bother. That means we have to figure out something else to do with that authentication material without knowing what the password is. And that's going to be the next step. Before we do that, we talked about another weakness. I was able to make a system on your network authenticate back to me. I was able to force a system to give me a password hash of its computer account. That's a problem. This is another opportunity to implement a change in your environment if you're vulnerable to these things and further your information security program, but at the same time, demonstrate compliance with a set of CMMC requirements. We're supposed to define essential capabilities, and then we're supposed to configure systems to only provide those capabilities. If you don't know whether or not web client, that service, is running in your environment, it's probably not an essential capability for those systems. It might be. Is it essential everywhere? I highly doubt it. So this might be an example where we have an opportunity to limit the functionality of some of these systems and also eliminate a serious risk from a cybersecurity perspective. And then I love 3.4-7. I don't know about you guys, but when you look at that requirement, at the AO level, it expands into 15 different things, right? 15 things we have to do for that one sentence, and it makes you explicitly and individually speak to programs, functions, ports, protocols, and services individually. So here's a great answer for that requirement holistically. You could say, we restrict the web client program and the supporting service, which means that we also restrict the WebDAV protocol and specific traffic over port 80. That's how we develop implementation statements for those types of requirements, is by starting with technical vulnerabilities. There's no reason, unless there is a reason, this could be a required service on certain systems, interacting with certain shares, but it's certainly not essential capability for every system in your network. And if you don't know whether it's running, it's likely that it's not an essential capability because you didn't even know you had it. So now we have a computer account password hash, and I can't crack it. I'm never going to get to know what that password is. So what else can you do with that? We're going to use that hash to authenticate without ever knowing what the password it was. And we can only do that if you didn't enable integrity checks for the LDAP service that's running on your domain controllers. So LDAP is the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. It's a key core component of Active Directory, and it runs on 2 ports, 389 and 636, I think. That is the LDAP protocol and LDAP-S, the secure implementation, the encrypted implementation of LDAP. And if you didn't modify the default configurations out of the box for Microsoft to enable integrity checks for that service, we can authenticate to it using a password hash without ever knowing what the password was. And that's what we're going to do here. First, we have to make sure that that's going to work, so we check. Let's check your domain controller. I'll use my computer account again. Active Directory, LDAP is read. Read permissions are provided to every object in Active Directory because that's how Active Directory works. I can check. LDAP signing is not enforced. LDAP channel binding, set to never. LDAP signing is a setting, a single setting in Active Directory that would prevent me from relaying credentials to the LDAP service. Channel binding is the same kind of corollary for the LDAP-S service. So these two things, these are 2 critical Active Directory settings that were not enforced in that environment. They're not enforced by default. And if they're not in place, we can do this. Force that system to authenticate to us again. But this time, the second that authentication hits me, because I'm just doing the same thing I did in the last step, I'm just going to make that system spit out another password hash. It's going to come into my system, and I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm going to spit it right back out to the network and log into Active Directory over LDAP. And because you don't have integrity settings in place, that works. LDAP doesn't care. LDAP doesn't ask, is this hash? This person is authenticating with an NTLM hash. I'm pretty sure they didn't put in their password, but you never turned on integrity checks. So we're going to let that happen. And now I'm logged in to LDAP. I have an interactive kind of session. I'm authenticated to Active Directory over the LDAP service. But I'm logged in as a server. I'm logged in as a computer account, the computer account that was running the web client service. So now I have definitely elevated my privileges at this point. I used to have access to one low-privileged user account, and then I had access to one low-privileged computer account, and now I have access to a high-value server that might have CUI on it. So what's the first thing we're going to do here? Now I'm authenticated to AD directly. Well, one thing we'll always do is just dump Active Directory entirely. That means give me a list of all your user accounts. Give me a list of all your computer accounts. I want your GPO information. I want a list of all your security groups, all the members to those groups. I'd like to know your password policy. And all of those things are readable by any account in Active Directory. Again, that's how Active Directory is defined. So that's the first thing we'll do. But that's not what we're here for. We're not here just to get information. We're here to do something really, really malicious, if you will. And that'll be the next step in this process, is what we do now that we're authenticated to LDAP. But before we do that, we learned that integrity checks for LDAP are really a critical configuration setting. And I'll say right now that this is only one example of the ways that we can abuse a lack of LDAP signing or channel binding. Those two settings are truly, from a penetration tester's perspective, if they're not turned on in an environment that we're testing, there are lots of ways for us to bypass security mechanisms and gain access to Active Directory. This is just one of the ways. That makes it a very important setting or pair of settings. CMMC has told us that we should be establishing and enforcing configuration settings. And if you had started with a baseline developed by people who are smarter than us, like the Center for Internet Security, or DISA STIGs, you would see that LDAP signing and channel binding is baseline security. It's part of those standards, something that should have been implemented from the start. And this is one of the risks that you accept when you roll your own baselines, when you don't really stand on the shoulders of giants who are aware of the ways that these types of things can be abused and have already done the research and figured out this is how you secure Active Directory. This is how you secure Windows Server. So these are really great resources, obviously. And if we had started with those, LDAP signing would have been enforced for sure. And then we just replayed credentials. That's exactly what we did on this network. We forced the system to authenticate, and then we relayed or replayed those credentials to another service on your network. So this network has not implemented replay-resistant authentication. A lot of people think that the use of a specific authentication protocol, like NTLM version 2, or even Kerberos, somehow magically gives you replay resistance by default. And that's just not the way that these authentication protocols work. NTLM version 2 doesn't natively give you any replay resistance, even Kerberos. I mean, Kerberos is a stronger protocol for a lot of reasons, but it's not about the protocol that you choose to use. It's about how you've configured the destination of where you're authenticating to. The authentication destination, Active Directory, or that network share, those places where you're authenticating to, those are the places where replay resistance is implemented. It's not built into the protocol. It requires you to configure integrity checking for these various protocols. SMB signing, LDAP signing. There's corollaries for HTTP-based authentication and all RPC, all these various things in Microsoft's operating system by default. They all support integrity checks. It's just our job to turn them on. So this environment didn't implement replay resistance, and now we have access to Active Directory in the context of a computer account. And that computer account belongs to an actual server on the network. So what do we do now? This is where it gets like brain-meltingly technical, if it hasn't been already. So does anybody here actually understand the Kerberos protocol? Me neither. No, you do? Oh, not me. But I know how to abuse a very specific feature of it. It's an incredibly complicated protocol, and with that comes a set of technical features that can be used to support things like delegation. Delegation is when you sort of inherit permissions from another account. And this is the reason, primarily, this is the reason why we wanted a computer account at the very beginning. Besides the fact that nobody is monitoring computer accounts, right? It's a better way for me to move around your network. Nobody cares about computer accounts. It's just a computer. But they also have more permissions in Active Directory than a regular user account does. So everything in Active Directory, literally, I think everything, is just an object. Computer accounts are objects, user accounts are objects, and each of these objects has a set of properties or attributes associated with them. So we'll use an example, a user account. A user account has a field, an attribute in Active Directory called description, right? You might put the person's title or role, or maybe their office or something in there, right? And users, that user account is not able, they don't have permissions to modify their own description field. Users can't change their description field. Computer accounts can modify their own attributes in Active Directory. That's a huge difference between a computer account object and a user account object. And that's exactly why we wanted a computer account at the very beginning of this, because this can be abused to exploit, we could say, or a feature. Again, it's a feature of the Kerberos protocol. This time it really is a feature. And that's called resource-based constrained delegation. We call it RBCD. It all corresponds to one single attribute in Active Directory. And the attribute sort of kind of gives away what we're going to do here. It's called MSDS, allowed to act on behalf of other identity. This property exists within every computer account object in AD, and it controls the Kerberos feature called resource-based constrained delegation. And that's a really long name for the very last line, impersonation. We've just used our LDAP session that we have. We're authenticated to LDAP in the context of that member server computer account. And we just made member server modify that one property, its own property, in Active Directory. Member server just put my computer account into that property, my backdoor computer account. So now, my backdoor computer account, the last line of that terminal output there, now my backdoor computer account can impersonate users on member server. So what does that look like in practice? It means that we can get Kerberos tickets to log into that server as anybody on your network. We request a Kerberos ticket, and I say, I'd like to impersonate a user called administrator. That's the user I want to impersonate. That user is a domain admin. Now we get a Kerberos ticket, and we use that Kerberos ticket to log in to that member server as a DA, domain admin, with no password. I don't know the person's password, but I configured Kerberos delegation. So I have inherited the administrator's permissions on that server. So I logged in with a Kerberos ticket this time instead of a password. I don't know administrator's password. But now I have domain admin privileges on that box, on that highly valuable server. And from here, it's always just a little more typing and Red Bull, and we're full domain admin at that point, right? So this is where the attack stops, right? This is the end of the attack chain. We now have domain admin privileges over the network. And before we continue, I want us to think about, how do you normally manage permissions in Active Directory? Like, we have groups, and we put people in those groups, and we assign permissions to those groups. If you have a file you want to manage permissions on, you would right-click it, go to the Properties or Security tab, modify the permissions on it. This is a completely different way of managing permissions in Active Directory that has nothing to do with security groups. It's actually managed by the system itself. The system, member server in this case, our vulnerable server, controls who is allowed to log into it as anybody, who is allowed to impersonate users. So this one Active Directory field, this one Active Directory attribute, controls Kerberos delegation and can be abused to impersonate users on the box. That's a completely different way of managing permissions than anybody is generally used to, I think. And that makes it incredibly valuable for attackers. So this is an attribute. If you have an Active Directory monitoring strategy, this is an attribute that should be under monitoring. Because if it changes, that means that somebody or something has given itself permissions to impersonate users. And they can impersonate anybody. We're always going to select, for a domain admin, for example, to impersonate. So this is not something you can fix. This is literally part of the Kerberos specification. Kerberos was designed this way on purpose. This is a feature, literally, that some people use, and it serves a purpose, for sure. There are organizations that are leveraging various delegation features for back-end stuff. So it's not something that we can, certainly not something we patch away. But Microsoft is aware, excuse me, that this is a serious issue that can be abused by people like me and real attackers. And they've known about this for a long time. So Microsoft gave us the tools that we need to protect against this type of attack, Kerberos delegation-based attacks. And they gave us the protected users group to do it. And I can't tell you how many times I'm on a penetration test, or any type of assessment really, and we go ahead and check the membership to that group, and it's empty, because most people have no idea what that group is for. And I'll tell you what it's for. It is designed specifically to prevent all manner of real-world identity and authentication-based attacks. If you put an account into that group, it automatically applies a set of policies to that account that would prevent things like caching of credentials in memory in plain text, or the use of weak encryption for Kerberos. It will prevent the use of NTLM entirely under most circumstances and require the use of Kerberos. And critically, for today at least, it prevents Kerberos delegation. If you put a user in that group, they can no longer be impersonated. So what we should, and this is what it looks like. If I tried to impersonate administrator and he was a member of, or this account was a member of the protected users group, I would not be able to get that Kerberos ticket. That user cannot be impersonated. That user is too highly privileged and too important to be impersonated on my network. So that's what we should consider doing. Excuse me. If you did that, you would be furthering your implementation of at least these two CMMC requirements. And I think I've shown that you would also be implementing some of the native tools that Microsoft provides to actually secure your environment against real-world cybersecurity threats. But we should consider implementing the protected users group because CMMC tells us that we need to prevent non-privileged users from doing privileged things. I am a non-privileged user. I started with 2 non-privileged accounts, and through some voodoo, managed to execute privileged functions on a server. So Kerberos delegation is a way to explicitly violate that control requirement. And the other one is, and this is a tough one, it's the last kind of piece of this requirement that I think is specifically difficult, is that we're supposed to employ the principle of least privilege. That's pretty broad. But they say we're also supposed to do it for our privileged accounts. And how do we do that? Privileged accounts, my administrators, they have admin. They're admins to everything. How am I supposed to restrict my administrator accounts? I need to have administrators. Here's an example of a specific function that you can restrict for your admin accounts that they don't need access to. At least most of them probably don't. That's Kerberos delegation. If you put them in the protected users group, they will be able to do all the things. They will be able to administer Active Directory and create new user accounts and do all the things they need to do, but they can't be impersonated. So that's an example of least privilege for privileged user accounts. So where did we start? We started with a network connection. It was kind of an assumed breach scenario. I'm on your network already, deal with it. And we have an environment that might very well have been compliant, right? It might have been a CMMC certified environment. They might have proven out that they've implemented the requirements and they have the right documentation and they have the right screenshots. It might have been a compliant environment. But then we abused Windows deployment services, or any sort of image deployment services really, and got access to a user account. If you had limited network access to those image deployment servers, you would be stopping me and my team in our tracks at step 1 of this attack chain, while simultaneously having a stronger implementation of at least those 2 CMMC requirements. But you didn't. And we created a backdoor computer account by abusing default settings in Active Directory. That's the machine account quota. So what do? We set that to 0. If you set the machine account quota to 0, nobody can create computer accounts by default except for your administrators. And then you can manage computer account creation permissions just like you do other elevated permissions. And if you did that, you would have stopped us at step 2. We wouldn't have been able to continue this attack chain. And you would also have stronger evidence for 2 CMMC requirements, at least 2. Then we used our user account to go find that mysterious web client service, and we forced that system to authenticate back to us because it was running the web client service. If you had disabled web client or managed that service and only let that protocol, talk over between systems where it's actually required, where that protocol really is required, you would have stopped me at step 3. And I wouldn't have gotten domain admin privileges over all the things, and you'd still have better evidence for configuration management domain. I can't crack that password. It's a computer account password. So instead, I replayed those credentials to LDAP. And again, these are 2 settings that you really should go check, I would say, because this is just one attack chain, one example of an attack chain that relies on LDAP signing or LDAP integrity requirements not being implemented. There are a lot of these attack chains that have this LDAP requirement in it. And if you had implemented those, you would have started with a secure baseline. You'd be able to demonstrate that your baseline really is secure. And you would also be implementing replay resistance, in real replay resistance. Like, I can't replay credentials against the LDAP service. That's replay proof. And lastly, we use that LDAP session that we got to configure this spooky Kerberos configuration that let us log into that server as a domain admin. The protected users group is the answer. Wherever you can, put your admin users, all of them, into that group. And if you did that, you'd be furthering your implementation of the access control requirements, because you'd be limiting permissions. You'd be limiting certain functions, even for privileged users. And at the very end, if you didn't do those things, the pen test didn't go well. And if it was a real cyber attack, that went really poorly as well. But if you did all those things, we wouldn't have been able to execute the attack chain. So you would have an environment that is demonstrably more compliant, or at least compliant, maybe not more compliant, but also secure. That's the part that we care about, right? You'd have an environment that is actually secure against at least this specific attack chain. A couple keynotes as we finish up here. Nothing that we did relied on technical vulnerabilities. Nothing here is solved by patching or updating software. 100% of what we did is based on weak configurations. That means, in a lot of cases, that means default configurations. And that means that attackers and penetration testers we abuse these configurations, I would say, more often than we do abuse unpatched software in an environment that is fully patched, right? Everything is patched up to the most recent version. There are no technical vulnerabilities. This attack chain can still exist, and other attack chains as well, and they are based solely on weak configuration baselines. And we've shown, I think, that the requirements in CMMC map directly to these weaknesses, which is something that I've shown in other CS2 talks as well. But replay resistance is a great example. The requirements in CMMC genuinely can provide security value, but it's our job to figure out how to implement these requirements. Nobody can do that for us. So here's some explicit examples of baseline configuration settings that, when implemented, obviously further our compliance program, but also eliminate real-world threats. So if you're going to spend all this time and all this money on doing CMMC, you owe it to yourself and your business to do it in a way that obviously meets the CMMC requirements, but actually providing real-world security value at the end of the day is something that you can get if you approach these requirements with a security-focused perspective. And one way to do that is by performing penetration testing. So if you're thinking to yourself now, man, I think if your environment really is vulnerable to these, I would say that's probably the first thing we should focus on. But I would like you all to consider whether or not the way that you're even just approaching your CMMC compliance program is something that you honestly feel that you're getting genuine security value out of, because you're making an investment. You're making an investment of time and people and money. And if you do it from a security-focused point of view, the requirements in NIST 171 and CMMC Level 2, they speak to real-world threats. It all depends on how we implement those requirements. And if you're concerned, maybe you are vulnerable to this technique, maybe you're not sure if you're vulnerable to these techniques, or maybe you're pretty confident that you've done everything right, that's the time that you're ready for a penetration test, where we can validate whether or not your information security program and the configurations you've implemented and the sort of processes that you've implemented really stand up to real-world threats. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I will open it up for questions, if there are any.
For a small or medium business that does not have Active Directory, what would the first step in your attack chain be?
So we have Windows operating systems without Active Directory?
Correct.
I would encourage you to look back at CS2 Tampa, CS2 Denver, where each one of these talks starts the same way. We demonstrate a specific attack chain. And they're all very varied. Some of them are cloud-focused only, some of them are hybrid, some of them are on-prem. Obviously, this one is more traditionally an on-premise attack chain. But there are a number of techniques that we would use at the very beginning that abuse multicast broadcast network traffic to recover credentials, in this case, local credentials for those operating systems. And we would authenticate, we would have to crack those credentials because you can't relay something back to where it came from since a patch in 2008. But there are a number of techniques that we could use that abuse things like IPv6, link local multicast name resolution, NetBIOS, all of these protocols that have a broadcast or multicast component, they are inherently abusable, and they can be abused to recover a set of credentials under certain circumstances. In this case, they would be local credentials, and in that case, our exposure, or your exposure, would be limited to that one system, barring credential reuse. But an organization without Active Directory is a harder organization to hack into, if I'm honest, because Active Directory provides an incredibly broad attack surface and centralized authentication. So that credential that I get on an Active Directory network is valid everywhere. I don't have permissions necessarily everywhere, but those credentials are valid everywhere. In your case, we have an island. But there are a number of ways to establish an initial foothold, against a set of Windows operating systems that are, for lack of a better term, islands. And I've spoken about those in detail at other CS2s.
Hi. You mentioned about putting administrators in the protected user security group. Is there a reason why we wouldn't put all of our user accounts in the security, or that security group?
That's a great question. I guess the answer is no. There's no. Well, first of all, that group can break things. I think all the fixes that I've been, spoken about probably need to be tested in any environment before you just go flick that switch. But because the protected user group turns things off, right? If your organization is not supporting Kerberos like end to end, or at least with Active Directory, that group can certainly break things. Number one. That's true of anything I said, I think. I'm not responsible for the buttons you click. But the reason an attacker will always try to impersonate a user that is more privileged than the user that they are currently owning. There's no reason that I would impersonate another low privileged user. So in the context of an attack, we will always go find that one domain admin that's not a member of protected users to do this. Because that user, by default, domain admins is by default in the local administrator group everywhere. And if you haven't changed that, then that's the case in your network. So that means the idea of this Kerberos delegation attack is that we have those privileges, we have those elevated privileges, but only on that one system. So we need to find a user that is a local administrator on that box. So we target domain admins, because domain admins are local administrators on that box by default. So there's nothing stopping you. Certainly, if you're doing it that way, you'd be better off disabling NTLM across the entire network and using Kerberos and sort of making it, implementing those same requirements. Turning off weak Kerberos encryption keys, disabling NTLM, all the other ones, preventing of caching of plain text credentials. Those are settings that you can implement at the network level across your endpoints and servers and things like that. Protected users is designed specifically to protect accounts in environments where we're not there yet. We can't turn off NTLM everywhere, but I do want to protect my domain admins. So let's put them in the group because they're the highest privileged ones and they're the most likely accounts to be targeted in a delegation-based attack. And I say that from experience because that's what we do.
Are we assuming for this engagement that there's no ADR detection or alerts? I'm just thinking
Nope.
scanning the network probably wouldn't, but responder on the network definitely wouldn't be triggering such things.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, so it depends on the type of engagement. Today we're conducting a penetration test. We did, which is less red team. So to me, a red team is where we're trying to be quiet. We're trying to bypass those tools. We're testing not just your configurations and your systems, but we're testing your tools and your people. And the alternative to that is what you might call a more traditional penetration test, which is where we don't care what alerts we set off. We are here testing the systems. We want to identify vulnerabilities, and everything that we've done. Responder is a great example of something that we would run on your network, right? None of the things that we relied on here, every single thing that we did can be done with native kind of living off the land binaries on a Windows box. But yes, there are attack signatures for every single one of the things that we did, absolutely. And you know, an organization with a mature information security program can certainly be capable of detecting most, if not all, of the things that we did. Yep.
From start to finish, how long did it take?
That's a great question, because that's before lunch. I mean, that takes an hour. That's at most, right? I mean, we know how these things work, and we just go from step to step to step. None of the things relied on luck. We forced everything to happen. So that's under an hour from network connection to domain administrator for that specific attack chain.
You mentioned some resources that you think are good for like organizations to secure the networks. Do you recommend what other resources that you would recommend where people can find these secure configurations overall for their environments?
Yep, there are the two that I referenced were the Center for Internet Security configuration benchmarks. Those are technology or platform specific benchmarks for secure configurations. The other one is one that originates from DoD, the Defense Information Systems Agency. They provide the security technical implementation guides. Those are called STIGs. Those are more detailed, and there's more stuff in them that makes them potentially more valuable and more onerous to implement. But they have STIGs for all major operating systems and things like that. And then vendor-specific best practices exist. Obviously, Microsoft provides best practices. Microsoft will tell you to turn on LDAP signing, for sure. And then it depends on the technology, I think. But the two that I know that would have eliminated those Active Directory weaknesses are the CIS benchmarks and the STIGs.
All right, Scott. Will you,
I'll talk to you.
yeah, will you be around after?
Oh, certainly.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much.